Welcome everyone to the top 15 levels in Force Gemini, the follow-up to my video covering my 15 least favorites. If you missed that video, go ahead and check it out now or whenever it's convenient. Or don't, and just wait to see what the good levels are. And we are going to see some good ones. If you haven't seen the previous video, I break down each level into 5 ranking criteria: environment, soundtrack, difficulty, pacing, and design. I also judge the levels slightly from the perspective of speedrunning, since that's my background. Speaking of, if you love Force Gemini content, check out my Twitch channel and community Discord. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video so YouTube thinks I'm special. Drop a comment too.
I loved this game as a kid. Never beat it though. Couldn't find all of the bears. Nintendo should totally do a remake.
One last thing. I do not include bosses as a factor in the level rankings. These are just the levels themselves, baby. So let's go.
Number 15, Eshebone Cortex.
First up on the top 15 is a likely controversial choice. It's one that is the bane of many speedruns due to a particular jump to get the spaceship part. Cortex is primarily just a quick diversion to pick up that spaceship part and a few tribals, but I have a soft spot for it, I guess. Musically, it uses one of my favorite tracks in the game, and its design is intriguing. How often do you find yourself running around inside the brain of a giant bug? There are electricity surges and random panes of glass everywhere as you make your way to the brain itself to see Andross's true form. The pacing and difficulty are pretty bland, with the only difficulty coming from the speedrun trick of hopping across the chasm to the part, which can be done with a pretty tricky trick. The design also comes in just a little below average, considering there isn't much going on here aside from the environment itself. In the end, Cortex gets a 14 out of 25 points, slotting in at number 15.
Number 14, Rith Essa Interior.
Up next is Rith Essa Interior. I really want to like this level. Aside from the frame rate slowdowns, it's a tightly cramped corridor with tons of enemies that comes relatively early in Lupus's first segment. However, you can unfortunately blow right past everything and not worry about the drones scattered around the level. The environment and soundtrack are some of my favorites. They both contribute to a feeling of danger across the level that unfortunately doesn't get matched by the level itself. Speaking of the difficulty, there really isn't any. The enemies are only there to shoot if you'd like to. I can see this level ranking much higher for casual players, but knowing that there isn't a life force door, it's a brisk walk to the end. The pacing also suffers because of this significantly. I do give the design a little bit of a nod because it's one of the few levels that doubles back on itself with different levels and does allow for a little bit of exploration that way. But I want to feel the threat that this level acts like it will serve up. Overall, the level earns 14 points out of 25 as we move on to the next.
Number 13, Palace Chasm.
At unlucky 13, we have the chasm portion of Mizar's palace, which is navigated by Lupus. Out of all the palace levels, this one feels the most authentic to me. Despite coming in a side or hidden entrance, Lupus is met with more enemies and more difficult navigation than the other characters. Immediately starting the level are a set of flying drones and 4 armored drones blocking the entrance that need to be eliminated. Once inside, Lupus puts on a pair of night vision goggles, don't ask me how, and traverses the tunnels of the palace in the dark. This makes for a unique and interesting environment that I wish had more use in other parts of the game. The soundtrack, like other parts of Mizar's palace, fits the level but isn't particularly noteworthy in my opinion. And despite having some enemies blocking the entrance, the difficulty isn't much to speak of. However, the level does earn points for its pacing and design. The pacing is pretty appropriate for this part of the game, and the unique elements benefit the overall design. The final score for Palace Chasm is 15 points out of 25.
Number 12, Rith Essa Ascent.
Ascent is a tricky part of Rith Essa where despite the relatively low number of enemies, it's possible to find yourself with low health, or sometimes die outright. The level features 2 spiral ramps that are separated by a large gap that must be hovered across using the jetpack. The environment is interesting, but it's not anything too unique from other parts of Rithessa, with the canyons and spires jutting out in places. The soundtrack of this level is a hit, and suits this section of the level well. I do dock the difficulty of this portion slightly, because this is supposed to be a very late game level, and doesn't quite feel like it. The pacing is also a bit of a letdown. It starts out seeming like it's going to be packed with enemies, but tapers off after the first zone. The design does have some strong elements with the required hover sections, but we've seen this before, so it's nothing too outstanding. In the end, I give Rithessa Ascent 15 points out of 25 for spot number 12.
Number 11, Icor Perimeter.
Home of the Big Bug Fun Club, try saying that 5 times fast, Icor Perimeter has a lot of unique elements. It involves a sniper portion, drone transformation, and mad dash past a few machine gun turrets in addition to the nightclub. The environment doesn't quite fit the level to me though. I mean, it's good, but it doesn't go hand in hand with what the level was trying to convey, I think. I love Icor's soundtrack and think it suits the level well, which scores it some big points. I wish the difficulty and pacing were a bit stronger, with the only required enemy takedowns being those scattered along the sniper area. The rest is just running past the standing drones. The nightclub, drone transformation, and racing minigames do contribute to the design, but much of the nightclub I consider additional content that isn't necessarily part of the level itself. It's more bonus content than anything. With that said, it's still a good level, but just barely doesn't inch into the top 10 with a score of 15 out of 25.
Number 10, Sekhmet Battlecruiser.
I know that this will be the most controversial level in the rankings based on what I've seen people say already. I really enjoy this level, and if the rankings were just my gut feeling, it would come in much higher. With that said, I can't put Sekhmet any higher with the system I used, and I think it ends up being ranked fairly. So, how is this possible? The environment of Sekhmet is great. It's a sprawling level that feels like an actual warship with enemies scattered all over the place and passages leading in all different directions. The soundtrack is likewise great and suits the level really well. It's grand, yet makes it feel like you're infiltrating someplace really secure. The difficulty and pacing are where the level starts to lose me. Despite having numerous directions that you can go, the level is basically a single circuit with almost no threat to be found for the number of enemies aboard. The pacing's in the same boat, or I guess ship. It has a lot of unique elements, but the level starts to feel like a slog with little going on as you progress to the later parts. The general design is average, with some attempts at platforming and hidden routes, but those attempts don't quite hit the mark as much as they should. Again, I do like this level, and please don't hate me for it barely making the top 10. It also features one of the most interesting speedrun tricks, but I'm not counting that toward the ranking. The total score for Sekhmet is another 15 out of 25, and is the start of the levels that I consider really well done.
Number 9, Goldwood Rim.
Goldwood Rim is notorious for speedrunners for having tribals get killed and causing runs to reset or lose pace late in the run. It's one of the late game areas that I feels like it's meant to be one. The environment stands out above the other Goldwood levels that came before with its more ominous soundtrack and design. It feels like you're infiltrating an ant nest as you navigate through the infested tunnels and are forced to eliminate nearly every drone you see. The difficulty is a huge hit, with several tribals that are in danger and need to be rescued quickly, and you're required to allocate ammo appropriately and fight a variety of enemies. The level is room after room of drones before taking you outside to fight even more before the end. I don't rate the pacing of the level quite so high for this reason though, considering it's just more of the same as you travel across it. The design does have some interesting bits and varies the scenery slightly, but it's not enough to be truly memorable. Rim is a standout level for its difficulty compared to almost all other levels, but that's its main feature. That's all it has, scoring 16 points out of 25.
Number 8, Eshebon Approach.
For such a short section, Eshebon Approach earns a lot of recognition. The atmosphere is threatening as the floor for much of it is literally lava and has you flying into the gaping jaw of a giant worm. The environment and soundtrack are both standout features, but no part of the level really slacks off. There are some difficult sections of the level as you progress through it, with enemies darting around pillars and a bridge of enemies that need to be shot down to progress through the final door. The difficulty isn't quite as spiked like the levels that earn higher praise, but it is present. The pacing I wish was a little more in tune with the later portions of the level, meaning I wish the level started off with more of a bang. Lastly, the design is also kind of middling. It has the flying into the worm and being inside of its huge body as a standout feature, but there isn't any variety to the level itself compared to others. I like the level quite a bit, but the competition at this part of the list is pretty stiff. Approach earns 18 points out of 25 for spot number 8.
Number 7, Rith Essa Bluff.
Bluff is a level of 2 halves. The first portion, when completing the level fully, is a trek through a series of tunnels full of enemies that need to be taken care of, as well as a handful of tribals to be saved. The remainder of the level has you running along the edge of a cliff before clearing some flying drones at the end. The environment and soundtrack stand out so well across the entire level. The layout after the tunnels where you're on the cliff pass is excellent, with the distant skybox adding a lot of atmosphere. The initial part of the level can have its difficulty, with numerous drones speeding around and trying to hide while taking potshots at you, but the latter portion of the level is pretty straightforward. This also affects the pacing, where much of the action is mostly front-loaded instead of being distributed evenly or with good peaks and valleys. The general design is on par with some of the better levels of the game, despite not having too much that captures the imagination or requires new or engaging ways to play. In the end, this level is solid and just short of some of the greats, scoring 18 points out of 25.
Number 6, Anubis Hold.
When it comes to speedruns, this is one of my favorite levels early on. Each room has something new to do and enemies to deal with. Shooting the switches to unlock the cell doors is also a fun challenge. The general environment, though, is a little lackluster compared to other levels of this caliber, but the soundtrack helps carry the tone of the level. The branching paths to the Floyd mission throws off the difficulty and pacing a little, with them being a diversion, and I'm not counting Floyd missions as part of the levels themselves. The pacing of the main level is excellent otherwise, as there's little downtime across the entire ship. Clearing rooms efficiently and shooting the cell switches quickly brings the pressure of the level way up. The design is decent as well, with a handful of unique features and overlapping areas, but the level feels just a little too short to put it over the top. The total score for Anubis Hold is 18 out of 25, narrowly missing the top 5 levels.
Number 5, Cerulean Dune.
Another level that feels split in half. Cerulean has one of my favorite segments, but getting to it requires a lot of mindless running. The environment across different parts of the level changes, and each segment suits the level really well. I'm also a huge fan of the soundtrack and find myself switching weapons or firing pistol shots in time with the music. The remaining categories do take a hit due to how this level is organized though. The first half of the level requires one room of deflector drones to be taken care of before you're off running around a huge open space collecting gold bars before heading into the tunnels where the real level begins. If the open dune wasn't in the level, or if there was actually something to occupy it, this level would likely be at or near the very top. The tunnel segment that rounds out the end of the level is that good in my opinion. Still, number 5 is nothing to gawk at, with Cerulean scoring 19 points out of 25.
Number 4, Tophet Castle.
The first end level of the initial campaign, Tophet Castle, is a short gauntlet of enemies guarding the first boss of the game. It's one of the few places in the game that feels like a well-defended fortress or outpost. I love the look of this level and the overall environment and how it fits with the general aesthetic of a zombified planet. It's like even the enemy faction is holed up against what happened here. Nearly every area of the castle is full of enemies that all must be eliminated, which serves as a great challenge. My only gripe with the level in general is the soundtrack, as I wish it had its own tune that made the player feel like they're really infiltrating a stronghold. The only other thing I can hold against the level is that it's just a little short. An extra room or two would go a long way to make this level truly memorable instead of just great. Despite those albeit minor complaints, the level scores 19 points out of 25.
Number 3, Goldwood Lodge.
Similar to Tofret Castle, if Lodge had an improved and unique soundtrack, it would be hard to say it's not a contender for number 1. My previous complaint about Tofret being just a little too short to be a complete challenge is settled here. It's the one late game area that really deserves that distinction. Enemies are all shielded, do a ton of damage, and are packed across several rooms in the level. Even with ammo spread across the different areas, you have to allocate your shots appropriately. Clearing each area is engaging and presents a real danger to the player, and the types of enemies are more varied here than anywhere else in the game. You have swarms of flying drones, snipers perched all over, armored weevil drones who pack a huge punch, and barricade drones trying to mow you down. Gameplay-wise, I love this level. I just want something playing in my ears that gets the blood pumping a little more, which is, unfortunately, too much of an ask this time. Goldwood Lodge comes in at a score of 20 out of 25 for the bronze medal.
Number 2, I-Corps Military Base.
I-Corps is the main base of operations for the game's antagonist, and it feels that way. Many levels seem like they should be full of enemies roaming around but are relatively safe, but not here. Several of the rooms have more enemies to clear than some levels have entirely. Even the front gate is well guarded with some tough hombres, making it feel like trying to get into the salty spittoon. The soundtrack, while better than the previous recent entries, still needs just a little more punch to escalate the tension. Even still, the variety of rooms to traverse and challenges in each is worth marveling at. This level features one of the few platforming puzzles made even more difficult using tricks unique to the speedrun. It's one of the few levels where it feels like the developers tried to throw in a bunch of different things and all of them hit. The lead up to the boss of the level feels menacing as you return outdoors and have to make your way to a separate facility. I'm a huge fan. The second best level earns 21 points out of 25, meaning there's only one level left. Before hopping into the number 1 level, I wanted to compare my rankings to those of the community who participated in their own ranking poll. I'm not going to give my thoughts to each level, but there are a few that show up in places far above and below where I put them. Y'all really like Sekhmet, it seems like. So, what does that leave as my number 1?
Number 1, Eshebon Thorax.
Far and away, this is my favorite level to play through. Having the best boss in the game attached to it is an extra bonus that doesn't even play a part in its score. The interior of a giant worm makes for an awesome environment, and the soundtrack just slaps. It doesn't matter what part of the level I'm in, the tone of the music seems to fit the action that's going on. Clearing every room of the level is one of the biggest challenges in the game, especially in your first pass through the level, because you do get to play the entire thing twice. A huge treat for me. It's paced really well, with the action rarely letting up and making it feel like the final challenge before finishing a major segment of the game. I'm also into the layout and design of the level as a whole. The exit to the boss is right at the start, but you have to run a circuit around the whole level to get the appropriate key, including crossing a suspended bridge in the main room. I've said it before, but the general layout reminds me a lot of Dodongo's Cavern from Ocarina of Time, and I will shout that from the rooftops until at least one person believes me. This is the perfect Jet Force Gemini level. I award it 25 points out of 25, gold stars, a trophy, and whatever else I can, because it's truly a home run by the developers. Thank you so much for listening to me gush about this game, and thank you again to those who participated in the community poll. If you're interested in Jet Force Gemini content, definitely consider subscribing, liking the video, you know the deal. But you can also find me live streaming on Twitch and hanging out in the JFG community Discord, linked in the description. Hope you enjoyed the countdown, and I'll see you next time.